Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Erin Urban. I'm a certified executive coach. And what I love doing is helping leaders, emerging leaders, remove those pesky career roadblocks that are getting in your way so you can achieve more impact, influence, and income. And in the future of work, those roadblocks are a little bit different than they were 2 or even 3 years ago. Today, I'm very excited to talk to you about what does the future of work look like? And today we have a fantastic guest on our show. I am really excited to have Ira Wolfe on the show today. Now, a little bit about Ira Wolfe. He is what he calls a self proclaimed millennial trapped in a baby boomer body. I love that. And most importantly, he is on the same wavelength as I am when it comes to the future of work. Fascinating things going on right now in our personal and our work lives. So, as you tune into the show, I want to welcome you. Please say hi, say your name, say where you're from. Give us a shout out. I'd love to welcome you to the show. And most importantly, don't be shy. Go ahead and speak up. Put those questions in the comments because we're here to help you. What are questions or concerns you have about the future of work or what's going on or changes in your work personal life? Based on a lot of the things that are going on in the world right now. It's hard to keep track of everything. Please put them in the questions in the comments. We're happy to help you. That's why Career Coffee Chat Show exists. And if you've never seen my smiling face before, you can find out more about me at coachyurban.com. And don't forget, this live show is also a podcast on all the major channels. You can find that at iTunes, Spotify, you name it. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which you can find a link in the comments below. So, as you probably know, the workplace will never be the same. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about what's different and why you should care at all as a leader or just simply someone seeking more career advancement in your life. So, prepare yourself for a very interesting conversation as we will dive in to what matters to help you stand out in the future of work and what is all this change and difference all about anyway. So who's Ira Wolfe? Well, Ira Wolfe is a great guy, first of all. And as I mentioned before, he says he's a millennial trapped in a baby boomer body, one of the top 100 HR influencers for 2021. I'm also intrigued by his LinkedIn headline, which says, terrified and fascinated by VUCA level change, as well as a future of work global thought leader. And he is indeed, he's the president of the Poised for the Future company, founder of Success Performance Solutions, a TEDx speaker, top 5 thought leader on future of work and HR Thinkers 360, and host of the Geeks Geezers and Googlization podcast, which has also been selected as one of the top 50 podcasts to listen to 2021. So if you aren't excited by now, doggone it, you should be excited to welcome our very special guest, Ira Wolfe, to the show. Ira, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here. And
thanks for the awesome intro, Erin. Appreciate it. Happy holidays. It's hard to believe.
I know.
We are December of 2021. That's crazy. I mean,
it's crazy.
The last 2 years have been a blur for sure. So excited to be here.
I'm excited
talk about what's next, what's 2022 and beyond look like.
What can we possibly change? We've changed so much. I mean, just how we think, how we interact. Although I will share that I had a personal gathering. A friend of mine is going to Antarctica. Who knew? So that's fantastic, very interesting. We had a personal gathering, and there wasn't too much concern about, do a fist bump, do an elbow, do a hug, what do I do? People are starting to get back to normal-ish a little bit, but the workplace is not.
No, I'm not sure any aspect of our lives are not. And for anybody who thinks it is, I mean, we had the wake-up call last Friday with Omicron variant.
Yeah.
And every day the news, it's not as bad. It's going to be worse. It's transmissible. It's not as transmissible. What are the long-term effects? Will the vaccines work? And it's not even misinformation. We just don't know. And, we talk, I often say that humans are addicted to certainty. It doesn't come from me. That's how our brains were wired. We like that predictable, that predictiveness. We like to know what's coming next. Humans weren't wired for constant change, and yet we're living in a world that there's perpetual change. And the move to get back to normal, and I put that in quotes, back to normal, first of all, we need to define what normal was. But as the last year it's almost 2 years now has proven, we're not going back to normal. We never have been. We're not going to be able to do that unless we go back to the Stone Age, and nobody wants to give up all the luxuries that they have, that we have now. But there's a lot to fix, and then we had the Omicron variant introduced. I just saw headlines run across my screen that the stock market dropped again because they came out and they said, well, we're not sure about inflation. We're not sure which affects the economy. And if the economy is affected, what about our jobs? What about that home we were going to build? What about that vacation we were planning? What about all these things? What if we may not have work? Maybe we can't travel. You and I were talking before the show, even about planning a vacation. It's like, okay, I can plan the vacation. Well, if we do it domestically, that's one thing. If we go to an island, we go overseas, we go on a cruise, we go to Europe. Those are all options that we considered. And you have to think, if it's beyond a couple of weeks, are we going to be able to do that? Or do our plans disrupted? So even when we plan to put some certainty or predictability or normalcy into
you really can't. That's the thing. I think it's a big takeaway. It's a big wake up call, particularly for people like me. I'm a planner. I'm a rampant planner. I love to plan everything. Everything has to be planned out. Just so. Yeah, it's not working out so well for me. And one thing I think really hit home in 2020 for me is there's a lot you can't control. Now, I logically knew that pre-2020, right? That was not like an epiphany. It really sunk in 2020. There's a lot beyond our control. And you know what, Ira? I could sit here and stew myself up about all these things that are absolutely outside of my control. And I think if I were to over summarize a lot of the guests I've had on the show, which has been a wonderful year, and I'm really excited to have our conversation too. That's my favorite thing, kind of, for a coffee chat show, talking to people like you. So, but if I were to over summarize, I would have to say people have basically said, focus on what you can control and try to find happiness within that space and adjust expectations as much as possible, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that makes sense at all.
It does. And I'm trying to think what the words that just running through my mind at the moment, but it goes back to what's been popularized as the serenity, like from like Alcoholics Anonymous and things. It's basically you change what you can change, but there's certain things you can't, and you just have to learn how to deal with them. So I forget it's much more fluid what the lines are, but the sense is that there are some things that we're just not going to be able to change. I mean, as much as we want the COVID to go away. In fact, I have a webinar coming up today, and I put the slide in because it was somebody with their head down, and it said, when is it all going to go away? And it's not. I mean, it's going to be endemic with us for a while. If we had a better response, which was also unexpected. So we had all these changes, and there's people that are resisting it, and we're not going to get into the politics of this, whether you want to be vaccinated, whether you believe in the social distancing, whether the virus, where did the virus come from? People get all these debates. But the reality is their life changed from it. And, whether you got vaccinated or not, it's our lives are going to be different. And whether you social distance and whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you're a planner or you like to live life one day at a time. The environment changed. It's going to affect every one of us in different ways, and we're not very good at that.
No, we're not very good at it. And, humans don't like change, which brings me to a really interesting point. I'm fascinated to understand. I know you have a very rich background in HR, and I would love to understand a little bit how you got into this more specific future of work focus. Like, what was the fascination? Because I know you have a great book behind you there, Recruiting the Age of Googlization.
Right over here.
So I know you have this very future focus, which is important to have when you're, in HR and organizations. But what got you into that? What was catalyst?
Yeah, so the future of, well, my passion or my pursuit of understanding what the future of work is, I guess it was just innate. It was also part of what's a business going to look like, planning, strategizing, put it into a bigger context of rather just an industry. And interesting enough, I mean, I didn't come from HR. I ended up falling into HR. I had a business that just happened to sell services and products to HR, but I didn't come from there. I didn't come from staffing, didn't come from recruiting, didn't come from HR, and really didn't have any intention of being in an HR, because a lot of HR ends up about compliance and regulations and training and benefits and wages and compensation and all those things, all very, very important, which, by the way, every one of those is being disrupted by now and changed. But a lot of the conversations I had, pertain to that. And nearly 20, tracing this business back, I didn't necessarily intend that, I'm going to go into the HR business. I was going to go into the small business, small, and really at one time even focusing on healthcare, helping doctors, physicians, accountants run their businesses better, because that's where I came from. That quickly evolved that I said, well, I don't want to do that, at least exclusively. And that evolved into an opportunity. I always enjoyed diagnosis, coming from healthcare. And I really pursued, I really enjoyed the assessment side of the business. And many people probably are familiar with a DISC or a Myers-Briggs or a personality test. And that sort of led me down that road into, and I wanted to focus not the personal coaching and the personal development, but on the business. How can businesses perform better? What can they do? How can they help leaders? And by doing so, I had to think about what the future was going to look like. It's not prepare people for today, but prepare for people for tomorrow. And for, we won't give our ages away, but we were around in 1999 for the .com boom. And at that point, there were a similar situation where there were more jobs than people. Not anywhere near as bad as it is today, but there were more job openings than people. And we were creating all these jobs, and even going down into high schools. 16-year-old kids were being offered $100,000 to program at the time. It was prior to Y2K and all this stuff.
Oh yeah, I remember Y2K.
Yeah, and all this stuff going on.
Here. We were all freaked out about that. Yeah.
And everybody sort of pointed, at that time it was, those darn Gen X, those darn Gen Xers. You were the cause of this because you would rather play games on your sofa than work.
And here we are running businesses. Not many of us, to be fair.
Technology, the internet was starting to really gain traction. Technology was advancing. We had brick phone, we had portable phones, the big.
I remember my first portable phone. If I had somebody with us.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have smartphones. Smartphones didn't come out until 2007. And so we had all this stuff going on, and I said, there's not one reason why companies are having trouble. And I called it the perfect labor storm. There were all these clouds, there were all these storms brewing, and they weren't happening one at a time. It was like as if a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, and a tsunami all occurred at the same time in the same place on the same day at the same hour. And it was a mess. And it's a long way around there, but that's how I got into the future of work, because it turned out to be a huge, broad subject. And then, through lots of conversations, lots of reading, I was like, wow, I mean, the future was going to be very, very different. I wrote a couple different versions. I wrote Geeks Geezers and Googlization, because one of the big aspects of what's wrong with it is we had 4 or 5 generations, and then it wasn't the Gen X. You passed the torch to the millennials, and it was, those darn millennials were ruining the world. and they have a horrible work ethic, and now it's Gen Z. So it's the same old story. But I talked about the generations in context of technology. Technology, the internet was accelerating change. And, that made sense. But, too many people still said, so how do you work with millennials? I go, that's missed the point of the book. Missed the concept.
I'd like to quickly jump in here because this is what I'm saying, Ira, and I would love your take on this. This is what I'm saying right now, because we had a great reflection last year. People, whether they wanted to or not, had the first time probably ever to pause. And I'd love to hear from anybody tuning in right now. Was it the first time for you last year that you actually had a pause to actually think about life, career, alignment, what's going on? Now we have the great reset or great resignation. And this is what I'm saying. So I'm running some data, some surveys, and trying to understand what's really driving this. And I'd love to hear your take on it, because it's not just one thing, obviously. Like you were just describing, back in the early 2000s, late 1999, that era, it was not just one thing. There were several clouds. It was like perfect storm. And I feel like this is also another perfect storm. We had the great reflection. Now we have the great reset. Why? What's going on? Well, what I've found based on my research so far is the main cause, not the only one, but the main cause is basically people are fed up with status quo, and the newer demographic coming into the workplace, or not really coming in, has been in the workplace, has experiences fear-based leadership, top down, are just tired of it. We haven't, due to economic reasons, we put talent development on the back burner, and we don't have time for that. Figure it out. You do it yourself. We don't promote from within. We don't support people. We're not giving them a voice. We're not focusing on their top three. So the top three concerns is this: what I hear. I want to know my work matters. I want to know that my work matters. What does it impact? And their impact is usually of a social nature. So how does what I do matter to the greater good? I want you to invest in me and my talent development, right? And I want more flexibility. I don't want to be tied to this, well, you have to be 9 to 5 and you have to sit in this seat or not, or whatever your frame is, because the work life for a lot of people coming into the workplace and have been in the workplace for some time is more fluid, and they need that flexibility. And it's interesting you mentioned, the baby boomers, oh, well, you're, well, first it was us. We were all headbangers, and we were all not going to have any brains, and we never be able to do anything.
Baby boomers, yeah.
Yeah. And Gen Z, Gen Xers were like, we're useless. It turned out okay. Millennials now, I think, are like, well, I'm speaking broadly, but I have to say that they're like, this is enough. Enough's enough. They're tired of the way it has always been done. And this is one reason why we're seeing this great reset, great reshuffle, great resignation, whatever you want to call it. And now with Gen Z coming in, I had predicted a long time ago that Gen Z would be that demographic would really push us into virtual reality. And I'm still holding on to that one. I think it will happen.
I think it will. So a lot to unpack there. So my head's swimming. We'll try.
Yeah. There's a lot. I threw a lot at you.
But let's start at the end. I mean, so first of all, through the history of mankind, at least going back to Chaucer, Shakespeare, and even Hercules, they always looked at the next generation as as a useless void. It's like they will be the death of us.
It's not necessarily true. It just will be massive change. People don't like change.
Yeah. One important fact about the millennials, excuse me. One important fact about the millennials is that the oldest millennials are now in their mid 40s.
Yes.
The youngest millennials
Matthew just
are now in their late 30s, maybe even early 30s, late 20s.
Right.
So a lot of the people that are blaming millennials are millennials. It's like, well, if we go with the stereotypes, if we go with the labels, okay. So and I know what they're referring to. They're referring to the next generation, which is Gen Z, which are now in the young 20s and late teens, coming into the workforce. So first of all, it's funny because baby boomers are blaming anybody that's under 60 or 50 as a problem. Nobody has a good work ethic. But even the millennials are blaming all those really don't get along. I mean, the biggest, what's coming out with a lot of surveys, the biggest conflicts happen to be between millennials and Gen Z. And the Gen Z are saying, "Oh, this generation doesn't want to work," and then the next older generation is saying, "Oh, it's the millennials that don't want to work," and the next generation says, "Oh, it's Gen X doesn't work." Rally is we need to get over it. There's people, there's baby boomers that I know that coasted for 40 years, got their pension. They didn't really work hard during that time. There's baby boomers that excelled. They led, they took risks, they innovated, they grew, and they're still doing it, me being one of them. There are an amazing number of Gen Z and millennial and again, under 50s, that all the group.
It's really personality and work style driven. It's not, it doesn't have much.
Oh, there's a million. There's a lot. I mean, some of it's just opportunity. I mean, because it's not all, we talk about the work ethic, and then you can go into the different socioeconomic groups, the different demographics, education opportunities that are available for, I'm old enough to remember, and we take it for granted now, that I remember when Ivy League, almost all the Ivy League schools were only male. If you were female, you couldn't get into school. And another thing that we forget about in the things that are changing, and again, I think that's an important part when you talk about the future work of going where we came from, because we forget some of these things. In 1948, 10% of women went to college, and only 32% were participating in the workforce. Most of them were stay-at-home moms. They were the Donna Reeds and the Father Knows Best, and
that's a very different story now. I mean, fast forwarding to the now, and what we're
60% of all college graduates are women, and
the leading majority now.
Yeah, and 60% are working. And the male participation rate has declined, where in 1950, 4 out of 5 men, over 80%, 82%, I think is the exact number, of men worked, of eligible working age men actually had a job. That's dropped under 62%. So there's now 4 out of 5, or there's now 2 out of 5, 40% of men who are eligible to work are not working, and they're not all maybe millennials and Gen Z. A lot of them are Gen X and baby boomers and older. So they're eligible to work, but they're not doing it. And
but I would have to say though that some of it, if it's the older demographic, so you got more candles in your birthday cake, if you will, some of that is bias. And what I'm seeing right now is there is a very rampant bias. If anybody over the age of 55 really struggles to find a position, and
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's definitely a bias that older people can't do things, and people are shocked when they find out what my age actually is, and it's like, I mean, it was on the Geeks and the Geezers show, Geeks Geezers Googlization. It was like, oh, so you're the geezer, and then it turns out, no, you're sort of the geek out of this group. And I know a lot of people like that. So one thing is, I mean, I think the message here, we can spend a lot more time on this, but I'm not sure we'll get to the future of work in that case. That one of the things about the future of work, we got to get rid of the labels. The labels are interesting for context, because the important message about this is we make assumptions that everybody knows this. We make assumptions. We just had a conversation with my in the car the other night going to the zoo with our grandkids, and my daughter-in-law was there, and she said, she can't believe that one of her employees didn't know how to use a phone. It was like, how does this work? And it reminded me of a video that I saw about 2 young, and they were young millennials. They were maybe in their late teens or 20s. I don't know if they were millennials, but they were young, and they didn't know how to use a dial phone. And what do they do with it? And the reality is they never were exposed to it. There were things that I'm sure that I have no idea what they were, how to use them, that my parents used and my grandparents used and earlier generations. And we make this assumption, we forget that when you grew up in a time that it was commonplace, we knew how to do it because we had to learn how to do it. And all of a sudden it goes away. And although it seems simple, maybe it wasn't so simple. Maybe it wasn't such a novel device, but we were taught that. But there's a lot of things that we just weren't taught. Just as we're talking about virtual reality. I mean, I've got my headset right here. I'm probably one of the few older baby boomers that owns a headset. But many young people do that. It'd be pretty commonplace to say, hey, we're going to hold class tonight in a virtual environment. During the pandemic, a lot of schools, a lot of people struggled with Zoom. Had we been a little bit more advanced, had they been easier to use, where people were more comfortable with it, the virtual experience would have been very, very different, rather than you and I looking like we're on Hollywood Squares here. And everybody else that's watching us on their portable devices, that we could all be in the same room together,
right?
Sitting in having a conversation, interacting, going back and forth. That our brain plays tricks on us, and we start to imagine we're actually there. We're in that place,
and then it starts to release the same chemicals. So that's what I'm from a nerdy neurological standpoint is very interesting, because there's a lot of things that aren't very effective in this format, this Zoom, this virtual talking heads format. It's just not very effective. And when we go into the more virtual reality, people are hoping that we can replicate some of what we're missing in this more talking heads environment. It's not very effective. So we're hoping we can replicate that, because what's interesting is once we can trick the brain will release those chemicals that are not being released in this type of engagement, because it's not releasing things like oxytocin. You don't walk away necessarily going, oh, it was so great to see people. No, you don't get that because you're not seeing them really, and your brain knows that you're staring at a camera. So just to really try to focus on the future of work, because we can chat about differences and this and that, and really you're right, we need to lose the labels, stop focusing on what people do and don't know. Who cares? Is it relevant? I'm not sure it is. What is relevant is that there isn't a new normal yet. I'm not sure there ever will be.
I call it the never. What we will have is a never normal. I call it the never normal. I know people talked about the new normal, the next normal, the future normal.
No, it's not there yet.
I use the never normal.
Never normal, exactly. And David mentioned, he goes, yes, pandemic gave him a chance to look around and get a new perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
And really helped him become more flexible and creative in his approaches in business and management as well. So having that time has been very valuable for a lot of people. A lot of people have, quote unquote, found themselves. They're having a different perspective about what they'll accept, what they won't accept, what they want to do moving forward. And we're seeing that change being resurfaced as far as people leaping ship and wanting something different. Or maybe they're just saying, you know what, enough. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. But, looking into the future of work, it's a very interesting world, and leaders need to show up differently.
Right. So even talking about HR, when we talk about change, I mean, the future of work, if you talk about the future of work, we can talk about the trends of the technologies and VR and AR and sensors and all this stuff. But the reality is all of it requires us to change.
Yes.
It requires organizations to change the way they do business. It requires individuals to become more skilled at being adaptable, at being flexible, and we'll kind of lead into that. But it requires almost everything we do requires for us to respond differently. And that means we have to change. And not all of us have that ability. And then there's the other component is sometimes we're working in environments that does not encourage that change, that does not support that change. So I've been working, one of the things following David's lines, I wrote my book, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization in 2017. It really was the evolution from my TED Talk in 2016, which was make change work for you. So again, always thinking about change. How do you make that happen? And when I had so much left over, I said, I should put this into a book and a presentation, and one thing led to another. And I wrote the book, and the first part of the subtitle of the book is When the Shift Hits Your Plan. That was the original book. So the first, for anybody out there that says, I'm not into recruiting, I don't recruit, I'm not in HR, but I am interested in the future of work. The first 150 pages in the book is only about change. It's about something we call VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Won't go into the background of that, but it's been around. I didn't invent that. But it was about what the world was going to look like. And 2020 proved to be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Most everybody agreed with that. I had just written I just updated it. We came out with the second edition February of 2020. Perfect timing for that. And the title of it happens to be Recruiting in the Age of Googlization, because the first half of the book says, here's the future of work. Here's the world we're going to live in. And here's how you're going to have to recruit and retain. Well, a lot of that came true of what, and I can't say what the recruiting part came true. What came true was all the vulnerabilities we had in the system, that everything that companies got away with, long applications, clunky processes, not getting back to candidates, ghosting them, taking too long to make a decision, trying to pay, not talking about salary and wages, trying to pay people the least amount you possibly can to just fill a position. So there was no equity. We didn't talk about, there was no diversity. The whole processes were biased. There was so much bias within in the hiring process and the retention process and the promotion process, even in the training process, who was eligible for training and then what happened after training. 2020 opened up all those doors. It sort of was the wizard behind the curtain. The curtain was, launched, and it was like, yuck. I mean, we have a really crappy infrastructure here. So all those things came to the forefront at the time, and the Googlization part in the future of work was there. What I didn't have was, how do we help people through that? How do we help an organization say, hey, we want to be better at what we do. What do we need to do? And some people said, you need to help your people. They need to have more grit. And then the word of the year in 2020 was resilience. We're going to be.
And it doesn't have anything to do with grit.
Yeah, we're going to. No, it's not. It's a different entity. But it's part of it. It's not one thing. So we're going to become a resilient organization, or next buzzword, let's become an agile organization. And that will solve all the problems that we have. In some respect, I don't want to make light of it that it's not important, but focusing on that this year and saying, well, next year we'll work on something else, it wasn't going to fly, because change is just happening too fast. But I was introduced, I followed this. I actually have a book about 10 years ago, and they were talking about the adaptability quotient. And it was a little quiz, and it was a book, and it wasn't very good, but it was out there. And I was introduced to an organization that was doing a lot of research. They were working with the UN, and they were working with some organizations and some banks. And they created a framework, and it's still evolving, to be honest. I mean, the framework's evolving, and it may change, but it really resonated. And it said, this is something that people can embrace and help them move forward. And what it looks at, they identified 15 dimensions that were important. And there's some recent McKinsey stuff that came out, and Deloitte and Boston Consulting Group, that actually supports where this was going. And I'm sure everybody stole from everybody else, because that's how it's done. But it looked at 5 abilities. The important part is it looked at what they call the ACE model. So it was abilities, character, and environment. The character is just your personality, and not that makes you good or better. It doesn't make you good or bad at making change. It just influences how you change. If you're an introvert, you're going to think about it. If you're an extrovert, you're going to need to talk to somebody, and you want to talk it out. But beyond that, it doesn't matter. Both there's introverts who are good at change, and there's introverts who are bad at change. There's extroverts who are good at change. There's extroverts who are bad. It just influences how you approach that. What you can change, how you can actually make change work for you, is there were 5 personal abilities that and I call them abilities because they could be taught. We can teach people how to do that. Resilience is one of them. We
Yes.
need to be able to bounce back. And I don't care if you are growing, thriving, flourishing, innovating, you're at the top, you're having the best year you ever had. You're going to get knocked down. There's going to be something that, and maybe it's personal, maybe it's physical, maybe it's emotional. But down the road, we're all going to have some resiliency. We have to have grit because we have to have perseverance. We need to endure. We need to keep going for the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
But those aren't enough because they don't help us grow. They don't help us. They don't help us go in a different direction. Grit just says, I'm going to keep running and running. I'm going to stay focused. I'm going to be tunnel vision.
Right.
I'm going to be passionate about it. I'm going to be persevere. But when the time comes when the environment says you got to change, no. If I just work harder, if I stay up longer and I work harder,
No, that doesn't work.
and I add another degree, if I add another certification or degree
That
to my
just equals
diploma
burnout
or
usually.
my resume, that's going to help. So the other three were really, really interesting. One was mental flexibility, and that's the ability to deal with cognitive dissonance. It's the ability to make sense of things that are going crazy, really weird, and not say, well, that will never work. It's go, well, if I take piece A and B, maybe there's some place that they overlap and there's some commonness. I often say it's watching CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News simultaneously, and rather than saying they're all, taking sides, is what's the common thread? What are you hearing? How do I step back? How do I make sense of this? What are the similarities? And usually there are more similarities than differences. We just don't hear them. We're always looking for that difference. That's the toughest one to kind of fix and train, but it's possible. The other one's growth mindset or growth mindset.
Right.
And that's, for those aren't familiar, just look up growth and fixed mindset, look up Carol Dweck, DWECK, a lot of research, a lot of work done on that. But it's an open-mindedness. It's realizing that if I get one more degree, it doesn't make me smarter. What it does is it allowed me to experiment, to try new things, to have an openness, to have more tools, to try again. It means that growth mindset is it's continuous learning, not piling on like a Jenga tower, but saying I'm always evolving. It's going to be different. The context changes, and it also requires us. The interesting thing about growth mindset, in order to have that mindset, you have to have hope. Or it's vice versa. You either have hope and it allows you to have growth mindset, or you have growth mindset.
And Ira, I was going to mention when you said grit, actually a lot of the grit revolves around hope, because that enables people to have grit.
Yeah.
If you don't have hope, it's difficult.
I'll actually argue a bit with that, because there's some of the research. There's a theory called the quality of motivation theory, and two of the counterproductive behaviors associated with grit can be self-punishment and self-martyrance. And self-punishment is no pain, no gain. Hey, if I work harder, injury, mental health, stress, burnout, that's all part of life. We're just going to keep doing it because I'm not going to be beaten. And then self-martyrance is actually the emotion associated with self-martyrance is that, hey, it's never going to get any better, but I have to keep trying. I'm running in place. I'm just going to run faster in place. Is a sense of hopelessness. So grit has some nasty stuff to go along with it. You need grit, and you need to keep persevering. You need to keep figuring out a way I can move forward. But sometimes you got to change direction.
And that growth mindset's important.
So, hope is an important part of all of that. But, and the same thing with resilience. But growth mindset, it seems that hope is most associated with that one. But the really, really interesting one is we talk about growth mindset as being this learning passion, which we need. We need to learn new ways to do things. But we also have to unlearn simultaneously. And that's the fifth. We have to unlearn. We have to identify what behaviors don't work anymore. What facts did we have that are no longer relevant? Or there's new facts that are more relevant. How do we take that? And very few of us were taught to unlearn. unless you did it naturally, and again, then if you did it naturally, they said you had ADD, that you lost focus, that you were constantly changing. And I say that somewhat facetiously because that's a real diagnosis. But the reality is that unlearning what's not going to work anymore is tough. Here's the strongest correlation in all the science that has come out so far. The strongest correlation is the more grit you have, the worse you are at unlearning. Or the more unlearning you have,
Interesting,
the lower your grit.
And I'd love
And
to hear from those of you who are tuning in, if you agree with that statement and what your thoughts are. So if I can encapsulate that, the more grit you have, the worse you are at unlearning things
you're not
that
paying
are like
attention.
those mental programs. You're just on automatic. You're just churning, right?
I'm going to do it next year. Hey, right now I'm so focused. We got to pay the bills. I got to get caught up. I got to do this. I got to do that. And so I'm just going to hunker down. I'm going to stay focused. I'm going to put my 18 hours a day in. We're not going to take vacation. We just can't do it. We're just going to plow ahead. And then at the end, there'll be light at the end of the tunnel. And when we come out, then we'll have time. And that never happens. That that never happened. You may get to the end of the tunnel, but then you got out there and it's like, oh, that wasn't the exit. That was the normal that everybody thought 2021
or that end of the tunnel happens to you because you burn out.
No, exactly. Yeah. Or the light coming down is not the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a train coming toward you.
Right.
So there's all these things going on. So what was really exciting for me, and obviously if you can't tell, pretty passionate about it, it was like, there's a way I can really help people. Not this abstract concept, become more gritty, become more resilient. Oh, let's go through this course. Let's have this exercise. How do you become more hopeful? But how do you actually help people get the courage to try something new, to learn something new, to give up something that's not working for them anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And if we give them the courage, then they can get the confidence to be able to do that. If we give them the skills, and if we do that, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I didn't look at that. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Oh, so yeah, change isn't. I may not like the change, but I can see some potential. I can see some possibilities. Right. I can see some opportunities. Now, within that context, and I know we just have a few minutes left, is that the other component I talked about, that was the A's. That was the A. Mm-hmm. We talked about the character, just how it influences, self-awareness, know who you are, the emotional intelligence, understand who you are, how it's going to affect those around me. But there's an environment aspect. And the environment aspect is, especially if you're working, what the organization is. And for all the leaders out there, this is where this is important. There's company support. Do the employees feel like that you have that they have your back? If they try something new, they make a suggestion. If they are stressed out, if they are burning, if they're juggling childcare, elder care, kids at home, illness, spouse, all this stuff that goes on, all this social aspect, do they feel you have their back? And then what about your team? Do the people you work with, and especially in a larger organization, you may not even know the other people in the rest of the organization. In small businesses, the team and the company are probably the one and the same. But in larger organizations, do the people you work with on a day-to-day basis, including your manager, have your back? Mm-hmm. And then it looks at what's the emotional health. Do I feel safe sharing a weakness, a problem I have,
psychological safety,
or on a positive, psychological safety, or on a positive side, hey, I have an idea. Are people allowed to have ideas, to try new things, to experiment? So emotional health is really important. The other one is work environment. Work environment is really the works in the policies. How do you feel? Does it support that? Do they have the resources to do what they need to do? Do the policies support that? You can talk all you want about hybrid care, hybrid work, and we're people focused. Those are great terms. But do you have the policies and the resources to make those work? And that's work environment. Mm-hmm. And then the final one is just job stress. Some jobs are just stressful. 9 months out of the year, an accounting job may not be super stressful, but 3 months of the year, it's crazy. Working in the medical industry now, working in the emergency room, in intensive care, almost anywhere. It's pretty stressful. So you may not be able to lower the stress of the job, but you can lower the stress of the environment in which they work. Just don't pile it on. So what this adaptability quotient does is it says, is there company support, team support, what's the emotional health? I just did a small organization, 39 people. Okay on company support, okay on team support. Emotional health was a wreck. And then we looked, and this goes back to the abilities. We looked, high grit, really low on learning. So you're going to burn people out. I mean, if you want to learn why we have a great resignation, why there's a great reset, why people are re-examining their future, why people are leaving, why they're calling in sick, why your productivity is going down, all these factors, I mean, in 20 minutes, I can tell you. And so part of it's a framework. It's not a solution. It's not the magic bullet. It doesn't mean, oh, we took this, we got a diagnosis, and now we're all better. But I like it because there's a pathway. And I like it because, especially you started to talk earlier about leadership, about the future of work. Organizations are going to have to change. Organizations are going to have to not just say that people are our most important asset. They're going to have to
have to back it up, finally.
Yeah, there's got to be purpose. So what does that look like? Does that mean that they allow everybody to have purpose, to follow that? What does that take? And that's going to take organizational change, and people are going to have to be better at it. But if you can create a great environment, but if you have people that are still struggling, they're still coping, they got all these issues going on, and they don't, it's going to be a long haul. And you're not going to have the success. You're going to pour a lot of resources and money. So it's a three-legged stool, but there's two important ones. One is you need to create a better environment, and the other is you need to arm people with the skills that they have. And I'll just stop talking at this point with one final comment. McKinsey just released a really cool study. I suggest going up and reading it. They call them Delta. Just look up deltas in McKinsey. DELTAS. And deltas stand for distinct elements of talent. They identified 56 foundational skills. The number one skill they found that determined by far, it wasn't even marginal, by far, the number one skill that they found was predictive for job success and career satisfaction and emotional well-being was adaptability. It was the number one employability, the number one trait or mindset, whatever you want to call it, that influenced future employability. The second interesting thing about that was they related it to what we teach people and train people. And, we teach people digital skills and collaboration and project management and all this stuff. The worst correlation with education was dealing with uncertainty. We don't teach people how to deal with uncertainty.
No, we don't.
We just say, oh, we're going to just show up and don't worry about it. But it bothers the heck out of people. But there was this dealing, the cognitive dissonance, dealing with trying to make sense of things was also on that list. It was really, really low. But the lowest was dealing with uncertainty. So we need to change the way we educate. We need to, as leaders, we need to recognize that people are struggling with that, and not that we can say, hey, we're going to make it better for you, but how do we arm you with the skills? How do we create a support system for you? How do we help you deal with all this stuff? Be more human. We don't put a poster up on the wall. And say we're putting the H back in HR. You got to really
People
do it.
are tired of that. They're not going to put up with it anymore.
Yeah, you got to really do it. So to me, that's the future. The future of work is going to be really dependent, and we're at this crossroads, similar to like climate change. We're at a crossroads now. We need to change the policies. We need to change we need to stop some of our bad behaviors. We need to learn how to live in a world of never normal. And to me, I don't wake up every morning depressed. I mean, by the end of the day, sometimes I am listening to news and hearing people. But I think there's so much opportunity, so much potential out there. And I encourage people to, again, follow me, look it up, continue listening to Aaron. It literally is going to take a village. There's nobody that has an answer, and everybody's life and environment and the circumstances are different. So what works for one person may not work for another, but it's a really good framework to follow.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, Ira. That's very helpful and very interesting information as well. I've been doing some data gathering, as I mentioned before earlier on in the show, and what we found is, based on the survey information so far, is people attribute the vast majority of people, like I mentioned before, not just one thing, but the vast majority say, great resignation because I'm leaving toxic work environments. Okay, great. So what's driving toxic work environment? That's our next question. Poor leadership. And what we're seeing from the coaching community very strongly is a cry for more coaching at that emerging leader, evolving leader status. Not just reserving coaching for executives. In some cases, it's almost like, well, that's a little late in the process. It really needs to happen much early on, because these early managers, these mid-level managers, are not getting any kind of leadership coaching, not a training course, not a workshop. We know based on research that doesn't work. Sometimes, rarely, we get an epiphany through these things, but typically not. It requires coaching. And that drives the culture, whether you like it or not. Your mid-level emerging leaders, they drive the culture, because the executives are up here. They're not necessarily interacting with the folks that are doing the work.
Right. And again, I would just encourage people, even from a coaching standpoint, it may not be coaching for leadership, but just life skills, helping people. If you don't think that helping a line worker, a frontline worker, production worker, a child care worker, of helping them get through, giving them the skills that help them get through day to day. I mean, they need money. They need money to pay the bills, so you got to pay them. But just helping them cope with what's going on. And being supportive, and sometimes that's all they need, because they don't get support anywhere else. Sometimes you do become their family, that they feel comfortable, and that's so they keep showing up to work because they feel comfortable. They have good team support. The managers are doing a good job. The supervisors are doing a good job, and they feel safe. People don't feel safe in their own homes anymore, and not only physically but emotionally. In many cases, because everybody's stressed out. So what are the tools you can give them that can help them, grow, rather than just keep them in survival mode? So we're at a very, very interesting time, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, I love talking about this, and it's going to be an ongoing conversation. It's not a quick fix. But hopefully you'll join me in the community, and everybody else who's listening will kind of follow along. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ira. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your insights into the future of work and how we can make a better future and deal with our very strong VUCA environment. Years ago, I was reading something, and I wish I could remember what it was. It's been a very long time ago. And it was the rate of innovation, the rate of change was just this, scale that was just going off the charts. And the scientists theorized that the rate of change and innovation would become so poignant. It would come to a point where it was almost like just instant, like it was just constant. And he wasn't quite sure what would happen at that point, but it was like we're headed towards that. It's such a strong.
Yeah. We didn't get into that a whole lot, but let me just, I try to help people visualize this. So if you take all the events we had in 2020, how fast and crazy that was, the uncertainty, and it was beyond just the pandemic. We had an election, we had social unrest, we had trillions of dollars poured into the economy. So everything that happened in 2020, at the current rate of change, there's what they call the 10-year rule. It doubles. If you're 20 years old today, by the time you're 40 or if you're 40 and time you're 60, you can do the math. What happened in 2020 will occur in 3 months.
Wow.
Okay, so what happened in 2020? So in January, February, and March, and then we start the cycle over again: April, May, June, July, August, July, August, September.
Deep.
If we continue that pace, by the time 40 years out, by the time 2060 rolls around, it will occur every 11 days. That's the pace of change. So think about this: is that if the next iPhone was coming out every 2 years, and then it came out every year, and then it came out every 6 months, and it came out every 3, and now it seems to be like every 6 to 9 months there's a new version or a new update. It's going to be every 11 days. I mean, it's going to be literally evolving in our hands.
And can we even there?
We say this about, we can go back to the generations.
Yeah.
We can say, could our grandparents, can my mother adapt at that rate, who's 98? Absolutely not. Can I do it, as an older baby boomer? I'm trying hard, but it's hard. But the youngest generation today that's being born, my grandkids, 2 years and 2 months, their life expectancy is 150 years. Based on everything we know. Now, we got to figure out how to have a quality of life after that. And we have to look at Social Security, because Social Security was designed for people when the life expectancy was 47. And now it's close to, it's in its high, it's almost 80. So
I'm not sure how that is, because
retirement, that people had one job, they're going to have at least 8 careers, different careers. We can go on and on, but you brought up, and I couldn't let that ride, of how fast things are changing. Where does it end? I don't know. It's going to be more challenging. Yeah, certainly for a lot of people. But it's going to be interesting, and that's why it's terrifying and fascinating.
It is very fascinating. Thank you so much, Ira. Yeah. We've had a few folks tuning in. David said thank you. Perspectives on toxic work environments and how poor leadership contributes to them are spot on. He gave them a lot to think about. We had, I believe this is, let's just check. Matthew is kind of shocked about our sharing the rate of innovation and how fast change will actually is predicted to occur in the future, based on our current rate of change and how that is evolving, and how the speed by which this is all happening so quickly. And maybe one of the reasons why I decided to move out the country, because it's just I need to unplug a little bit. Yeah. Because we'd have to find space. At the end of the day, the rate of innovation is just so extreme. Our change, socioeconomic, political structures, our personal lives, everything is just changing and shifting, and there is no new normal. And as a coach, I would have to say, remember that our human bodies, our rate of evolution doesn't happen as quickly. So keep that in mind, that we are trying to interject a much slower rate of evolution in our human mind structures, how we're set up, and almost like forcing that into a very strong, maybe tech-driven change cycle. What does that look like, and what stress does that create for you as the individual? And then, okay, knowing that, do you need to create some quiet moments? And I'm seeing a lot of this, okay, because we have so much coming at us. How can we absorb it? We can't absorb everything, so we have to choose, right? But it's been fascinating having you on the show, Ira. Thank you so much for sharing. I know we could keep talking for hours.
We could. And for anybody who wants to continue the conversation, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on there, but please reach out that way. And I've got a community where we talk about it all the time as well, which is Googlization Nation. It's free. Googlizationnation.com.
Great, thank you.
And if you're interested in the book, by the way, it's up on Amazon. So
And you can share those also, Ira, in the comments if you will, and that way people can get those too. Of course, we'll pop those in the comments as well, so people can get that in the show notes. And again, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show. And for all of you tuning in, my friends, keep elevating.
Okay. Stay safe.